Well, as you know, we've been going through a series we've titled The Lost Art of Letter Writing. For those of you that have been here, we're going through Paul's letters to the churches. And we come this morning to the church, a letter to the church in Philippi, we call it Philippians. And here's what he's talking about. He's talking about changing the way you think about people around you. So I don't know if you know this about your thoughts. Do you know that every human being, over the course of a day, we have approximately 50,000 unique thoughts? Yeah, and some of you think, you didn't know you thought that much. Yes, you do think that much. Here's the problem. 80% of your thoughts are negative thoughts. They're unhappy, angry, cranky thoughts. You have about 40,000 unhappy, negative, hurtful thoughts a day. We're going to change that this morning. We're going to get that right out of you, and we're going to change the way you think. That's the whole goal. That's really the goal of Philippians. So let me tell you about Philippians and why he writes the letter to this church in Philippi. So there's about 15 churches we read about in the New Testament. 13 of those churches get letters from Paul. And most of the letters, almost all of them, are letters addressing problems and issues in the different churches. I'll start with Rome. The church in Rome, you had this ethnic tension between Gentiles and the Jews. And then you look at the church in Colossae, and he says, stop all the legalism. They had resorted to that. The Corinthian church, they had so many problems. They had problems with division and dissension and addictive problems. They had so many problems, he wrote them 3 letters. You don't want 3 letters. We have 2 of them. The church in Thessalonica, he writes to them because they had said, Jesus is coming soon. You don't have to work anymore. So they all quit their day jobs. And Paul says, no, he's coming, but you've got things to do. And he says this, stop looking for which cloud Jesus is going to float in on next. It's not happening like that. And so get back to work. And then when he writes about the Ephesians, he tells Timothy, he says, it was like he said, I was fighting with wild animals there. So he has all of these problems he's addressing with these different churches, and then he writes to the church in Philippi. And this is a letter of blessing. He's not addressing a problem. It's about the only time he writes not to address a problem. This church is his dream church, literally. Do you remember Paul said he had a dream, and he dreamed of a man standing on the shores of the Aegean Sea, a man from Macedonia, and Philippi is in Macedonia. In fact, it was the regional capital. And then he goes there and he plants a church. And then if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about how the Macedonian church had been a blessing to Paul. And so he's writing to them to say, thank you for being a blessing to me. He says, you've blessed me, so I'm writing you to put a blessing on you and keep blessing each other. And so that's really the crux of our message, and what we're going to talk about this morning is that you are meant to be a person of blessing. And I want to talk about how do we become people who bless others. And maybe you've never thought of your own life in those terms, that God put you here to be a person of blessing. Well, let's read what Paul says to them. I'm just going to focus in on 2 verses in chapter 4. I'll start there. Philippians 4:8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about those things. All right, that's from the TNIV. I want to read from the Message Bible, the same passage. The Message Bible is a paraphrase as opposed to a translation, and it's Eugene Peterson, but because of the texture of his words, I want you to hear what he says. And he writes this. This is Philippians 4:8, summing it all up, friends. I say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. He says, put into practice what you learned from me, what you heard and saw and realized. Do that, and God, who makes everything work together, will work you into his most excellent harmonies. So he writes these beautiful words. And here's kind of the crux of the idea, and this is what we'll be talking about this morning. And I have this key idea in your notes, and it's this. At the core of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ is to become a person of blessing. That's you. That's your life. Constantly pouring out good and the very best into the lives of people around you. The thing is, when we talk about blessing people in this country, in our vernacular, the word blessing has lost most of its meaning. It's a word rich with meaning among the Hebrew people. But for us, it's kind of slipped away. We use it when someone sneezes. We say, bless you, or God bless you, or something like that. I had one son, if we didn't say bless you after he sneezed, he would say, bless me. And that's because somebody needed to bless him. We use blessed like to cover over a criticism. Do you know what I'm talking about? For example, you'll say to a friend, oh, look at her outfit. It's so hideous. She doesn't know pink and brown don't go together. God bless her. You know, that's what we say. And that's how we use it. And it has much more deep meaning than that in the Bible. When Paul talks about blessing someone, a blessing is very personal. It's very powerful. To bless someone, here's what it means. If I try to describe it or define it in Hebrew thinking, is that to bless someone is to pour out, project good into their life, to do the very best. It's actually more than words. It's something that we do when we bless someone. It's not just something that we say. And so this morning I want to kind of wrestle with this question, how do we become persons of blessing? And I'll start with this thought. The first challenge that Paul gives us here, and let me grab my Bible again, is he says, think the very best, not the very worst. And here's how he says it if we go back. He says, summing it all up, friends, I'd say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things noble. Then his list goes on. Praiseworthy, the very best. And so I have on the screen, think the very best of others, not just the very worst, because sometimes that's what we do. Sometimes our minds, the problem with the human mind is we tend to think the worst intentions that people have. We tend to think the worst of their abilities or what their motivations are. I know this is true because it happens to me. A few years ago, I had a friend, someone I had known for a long time in the Grove. He texted me. He said, hey, Palmer, my wife and I need to come see you. Can we come over today? Well, can I tell you what my first thought is? Oh, no, they're really going to criticize me about something. They're really unhappy about something, whatever I've done. So I text back, I go, sure, come over at 10. You know, I know it's going to be an hour of a gripe session. And so then he texts back, just so you know, Palmer, it's not to complain about anything. That's what I don't know how he knew what I was thinking. So now my next thought was, oh, no, they're coming over as a couple. Their marriage must be falling apart. God bless them. It's a mess. That was my next thought. And so I got ready to counsel them in their messed up marriage. And they came and they sat in my office and he said, Palmer, and I'm starting to say, hey, so how can I help you guys love each other? He says, Palmer, we're here to bless you. He says, we have a gift for you and your family. And they gave us a gift for 4 nights at the Del Coronado Hotel in San Diego. Are you kidding me? On a Wednesday? Nobody does that. You know, it doesn't happen. And I'm thinking, do you see how I'm thinking the very worst about them? But they had the very best for me. And I think we do this every day. We think the very worst of a coworker, or we think our husband or our wife had the very worst intentions when they don't. And so Paul wants to change the way we think about each other, the way we treat each other with our thoughts, because sometimes our minds fill with the negative and the problems, and his challenge is to think the most noble, honorable thoughts about those around you. Here's the next challenge that I see in this. He says, if we keep reading here, Paul says, fill your minds with, and then he has a list, and we'll start with these. Fill your minds with the beautiful, not the ugly. And so the second thing I want to say is, see the beauty in others, not just their imperfections. Sometimes we only see the worst, and we see all of their problems and their imperfections. I was in California yesterday in Costa Mesa. My son was graduating from college, and I went to a coffee shop I found. It's called Milk and Honey, and when I got there, I told my wife I'd be back in 10 minutes with coffee. An hour later, she's going, Palmer, where are you? And I'm going, this is so awesome, I can't leave. And so I have a picture here because in their parking lot, they spray painted little phrases behind each car. Well, the phrases were already there before the cars parked, but they said things like, look for the best. You know that? We don't tend to do that. We look for the worst in people. I think we can learn from kids. Kids tend to see the best in people, I think more than adults do. I think that's true. I think it's true because fairy tales, if you think about it, are all about someone seeing the best in someone else. Because if you think about fairy tales, they're all stories of transformation, but every fairy tale starts, practically all, start with someone whose life is a real mess. Like there's a beast. There's this beast, and then he's scaring the town, and then this village girl named Belle. I have 4 sons. By the way, last service I said Bella, and I got corrected and criticized, so I haven't seen it with my sons, so it's Belle. And Belle kisses him. And it changes everything. You have stories, for example, of a girl who's a stepdaughter and her stepsisters can't stand her and they treat her like a servant, but then a prince falls in love and the shoe fits and he sees a beauty in her. There's fairy tales, for example, of a frog being kissed by a princess and the frog becomes a prince. There's a story you all know of the fairy tale of the ogre in the swamp, and he's this green thing in the swamp. Who could love a green thing in a swamp? And a princess named Fiona falls in love with him. And kids get these stories. Fairy tales are stories of transformation, but they're first of someone recognizing the good and the beauty in someone that everyone else missed. And kids have this ability that we need to learn from because we just tend to see the worst on people on the outside, their worst qualities, and we keep them at arm's length because of what we see. This last week, CNN was running a story of a boy in Alabama. His name is Josiah. And Josiah is just 5 years old. And Josiah and his mother had gone into a Waffle House. And when they go in the Waffle House, Josiah notices that there's a homeless man sitting by himself. And the homeless man is not eating anything. In fact, everyone's ignoring him, including the servers. And so Josiah says to his mother, I want to see if he needs something to eat. Let me show you the video. I brought the CNN clip. It's just a minute and a half. Watch this with me.
The faith of a little boy was on full display at the Waffle House at the Prattville-Millbrook exit one night a few weeks ago.
I love you.
It's the story of 5-year-old Josiah Duncan and his mom, Ava Falk.
There was a man standing inside that was real dirty and had his bag.
Josiah was so troubled by the man's appearance, he peppered his mom with questions and more questions.
Oh, and I said, well, because he's homeless. And Josiah said, well, what does that mean? And I said, that means he doesn't have a house.
And apparently not a friend to lean on.
He doesn't have no food.
Josiah felt the urge to do something. He insisted on his mom buying the stranger a good meal. She obliged.
But he came in and sat down, and nobody really waited on him. He just kind of sat there. And Josiah jumped up and asked him if he needed a menu because he couldn't order without one.
Instead of ordering a cheap hamburger, the homeless man got the works.
He said, well, can I have bacon? I said, you can have as much bacon on your hamburger as you want.
But before the man could take the first bite, Josiah insisted on something else.
I wanted to say the blessing with him.
And Josiah did, publicly, with 11 other customers watching. Josiah sang it as loud as his little voice could muster.
Thank you for our blessings. Thank you for our blessings.
And that man just cried, and everybody else in Waffle House was crying.
The man ate his meal and went on his way. He left with a full stomach while Ava left with a full heart.
I wasn't judging him by
topped off with what she considers a touch of divine wisdom.
That you never know who is an angel on earth, and then when the opportunity comes at you, you never should walk away from it.
A little boy saw a need.
Oh, man.
And met it face to face.
How do you like that? We can applaud a 5-year-old in Alabama. So he sees a man that everyone's ignoring, and he goes and he sings a blessing over him. How do you like that? You see, in order to bless someone, think about this with me, you have to see them first. And sometimes our eyes glaze over and we don't see those who need to be blessed around us, but kids do. If you think about the oldest blessing in the world, it's in Numbers chapter 6, verse 24. It's called the Aaronic blessing. And we have this blessing where it talks about how God, when he blesses you, and when he blesses us, me, he looks us in the face and then he blesses us. Numbers 6:24 goes, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And then listen to this. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. You can't bless someone until you look them in the eyes and you see them. And then you realize that they need this blessing in their life. And so see the very best in others. See the beauty, not just the imperfections. The next thing I'll say as we look at this passage in Philippians 4 is, say the best about others and stop all of the cursing. That's what Paul says. He said, find things to praise, not just things to curse. I think sometimes our lives fill with cursing others rather than praising them. And so the challenge is to bless people with your words. Words are powerful. I think sometimes we forget that words have this ability to destroy someone and tear them down and to break their spirit. Or words have the power to build someone up and give them life and give them energy and courage. Proverbs 18 says this, 18:21, words kill or words give life. They're either poison or fruit. You choose. So when I say that words are powerful, I think of a Dr. Emoto in Japan. Now, I'm going to tell you about a piece of research he did, and it ranks right up there with ancient alien theory, okay? So just put your mind in that place because you're not going to believe it, and it's kind of weird and bizarre. So Dr. Emoto was convinced that our words, yes, they affect people's souls and individuals. He says our words affect inanimate objects, like things that grow. So he did this study. He took 2 jars. He put rice in each jar, and then he filled it partway with water. And then for 30 days, 1 jar, he blessed the jar. He said, rice, I'm so glad that you're in our house. Thank you for feeding our family. We need you here. You're beautiful. For 30 days, the other jar, he cursed it. And he said, you're evil, rice. It makes no sense. Just so you know, this sounds like it makes absolutely no sense, but bear with me. And so, by the way, there's even junior hires have repeated this study on the World Wide Web. It's there. And so you have 2 jars. At the end of 30 days, one has been cursed and one has been blessed. The one that he blessed was still white and bright and shiny and healthy in the jar. The one that he cursed, it turned black and septic. I brought a picture here. And this is true. And people have repeated this over and over. And he says, supposedly the water carries the tone of your voice and the rice can know whether you're cursing or blessing it. I don't know. But it's a picture of your soul. It's a picture of someone else's soul. It's a picture of what happens when you keep breaking someone's spirit with your words. You see, our souls are very sensitive to blessing and cursing because we're made to be blessed. And God put you here to bless others, and sometimes our days fill with cursing. There's one more jar in this study. I don't have it in this picture. There's a 3rd jar. The 3rd jar, this is true. He had a 3rd jar that he just ignored. He didn't curse, he didn't bless. By the end of 30 days, he says that jar was the most rotten. That one was the most blackened and septic. The one he ignored. When I say that, I want to just remind you, be very careful. When you're around the people who you love, with all of the texting and the Facebook and your face and your phone and the surfing of channels on TV, when the people who you love are around you and you ignore them, you start to damage their soul. Be very careful when you ignore the people around you. So Paul, he says this. He says, let's get out of that habit of breaking people down with cursing and let's start to build them up. When you curse someone, you project the very worst on their life. Maya Angelou, who just passed away, one of the great writers and poets of the last century, she just died a few months ago. And she has a piece that she wrote about words and the power of words. And I'm going to read it to you. And she writes, you must be very careful about the words you use or the words you use in your house. Words are things. You must be careful. Careful about calling people out of their names, using racial pejoratives and all that ignorance. Don't do that. Someday we'll be able to measure the power of words. I think they are things. They get on the walls, they get in your wallpaper, they get in your rugs, in your upholstery, in your clothes, and finally into you. She's right. The words we speak become who you are. So she says, be very careful with the words you use. Words are powerful. Words can break someone's spirit and tear them down, or words can build up. And that's why Paul says, find things to praise. Every person has qualities to praise. And sometimes we forget when we curse someone with our words, if you become that person, your words don't stay in a vacuum. They're like venom that spray out and they poison people for days and weeks and months at a time. But Paul says instead, find things to praise. Everyone has things to praise. We just miss it sometimes. So here's the final challenge, verse 9. Put into practice what you learned from me, what you heard and saw and realized. And then I'll keep reading. Do that, and God, who makes everything work together, will work you into his most excellent harmony. So he says, put this into practice. Practice more grace. Practice more love. Most of you here have played Monopoly, right? Very few of you have read the rule books. Don't raise your hand, it's rhetorical, but most of us don't read the rule books. And because you don't read the rule books, you end up arguing with your family and flipping the board. That's what happens. But if you read the rules, it says this in the rule book. One of the pieces of advice is this. Be the kind of person other players want to sit next to. Isn't that stunning? Be the kind of player that other players want to sit next to. You know what the message is? If you're a jerk to everybody else, all right? If you're that guy, then when it comes, you've got Boardwalk and you need Park Place, nobody's selling. You can offer thousands. They're not selling. So be the kind of person that other players want to sit next to. Put into practice this grace and this mercy that God invites us into. Become a channel of blessing to the whole world. What if we had at the Grove 2,000 people going out from here who were channels of blessing in your neighborhood and in your house and in your workplace? It would change everything, wouldn't it? And I hope that after this morning, as people get to know you, they'll get to know you as a person of blessing. I hope that when they ask about you, when they say, hey, tell me about Dave or tell me about Allison, maybe people will start to say about you, well, she's a person of blessing. Nobody said that before. Well, Dave, he's a person of blessing. And what if you started to think of yourself in those terms, that you are God's person of blessing, and maybe you've never thought of yourself in those terms, and then when you walk into your office or workplace tomorrow morning, you remember, I'm a person of blessing here. God put me here to bless all of these people. What if you thought about your own home even when you walk into the house? I'm here today, when I wake up, to bless everyone here with my words and with my actions. What if you started blessing your neighbors? I think it would change everything. Imagine that about your life. And then when I say that, I want to challenge you with a 21-day challenge, all right? So they say it takes 21 days to form a new habit. Maybe you've heard that. And so I want to give you a 21-day challenge. And the challenge is that at the end of the 21 days, you treat people and you think of yourself differently. Now, you don't have to participate in this challenge. You can remain the same old sour self that you are right now, or you can be a part of this. And so the challenge is for the next 21 days, we're asking you to write things down, right? Write letters each week. This one is just to you. I want to challenge you to write down each time you bless someone. with your words or your action, end your night, end your day by writing down the ways you blessed someone. Hopefully that list is 4 or 5 long. And then you have to write this down too. If you curse someone, I want you to write that down too. Be honest with yourself. And hopefully at the end of 21 days, that list of blessing is much longer than the list of cursing. And I hope it will make you hold your tongue, because you'll go, oh, I've got to write this down if I say that. And I want to end with this thought. If you become a person of blessing and we become a church, a gathering of people who are blessing each other, one of the disciplines that you need to learn and we all need to learn is to receive a blessing. You see, in our culture, we're not so good at receiving a blessing because we like the idea of charity, but we don't like being charity. Well, for many of us, as soon as someone blesses us, if a neighbor makes us a meal or does something kind for us, our very first thought is, okay, what can I do back for them? But the act of grace and receiving a blessing is simply being blessed and not immediately thinking of how can I get even with them and give them something back or outbless them. No, that's not the point. Just receive, be calm enough to receive a blessing. I was reading of a man who traveled to India recently, and he was writing a story, and he said that as he was leaving this village after several days, a boy ran up and gave him a stalk of bananas. And so in return for the bananas, he took off his watch, which would be like the most valuable item in that boy's whole entire house, and gave it to him. And he said, each time you look at the time, remember you have a friend in America. It was just weird. Why not just say, I'll buy you a Ferrari, and each time you drive it, think of your friend in America. No, the boy blessed him, and he tries to outbless him. Don't do that. Just settle down and receive a blessing. My mother yesterday, I was with my mother in California, and we're taking her to the airport. So I asked one of my sons, he's 20 years old, big and strong, and I said, come with me to carry their luggage. And my mom is saying, we don't need help. She's 86, she needs help. We don't need help. I said, no, let him come. He's going to carry the luggage. So my 90-year-old father, we don't need him. We don't need help. Just tell him to stay. And I finally said this because these thoughts were in my head. Mom, he just wants to bless you. Can he bless you? Is it okay if he comes and blesses you? And she said, okay, he can come bless us, but it's not because we need help. And I said, just settle down, Mom, and let him bless you by carrying your suitcase. Okay, he can come bless me. Learn to receive a blessing. If someone does something for you, you don't have to do something back. Just thank them.